B'shus Rav Kohn Shlita, other Rebbeim who might be here, and B'shus the Talmidim of our incredible yeshiva. We've been davening for a long time already. Achas Sha'alti me'es Hashem osa avakesh, shivti beveis Hashem kol yemei chayai, lachsos b'noam Hashem ulevaker b'heichalo. I'll just be honest, just by way of hakdama, I don't usually get to learn Night Seder in the Beis Medrash. I didn't get to learn Night Seder in the Beis Medrash tonight, but I often reminisce about my time when I was a bacher here in yeshiva, learning Night Seder. The Gluck building didn't exist at the time, but to just walk in and to hear the Kol Torah, to see the Talmidim learning so seriously, so beautifully, it's an incredible thing. Shifti beveis Hashem kol yemei chayai. There's a sefer called Sha'alti by Rav Dov Ber Eliazarov. He's a Rav in Katamon. He's a Rosh Kollel in KBY. It's a volume of Inyane Halacha. And his Hagdama to the sefer, he wonders, what exactly was David HaMelech dreaming of? Achas Sha'alti me'es Hashem osa avakesh shivti beveis Hashem kol yemei chayai. David HaMelech says, if only I could stay in the Beis Medrash all the time. So he writes there in the Hakdama, he says, let's be honest, it wasn't a realistic tefillah for David HaMelech. Open up to the beginning of Brachos, Daf Gimel, Daf Dalet, a couple of sugyas, Gemaras that describe David HaMelech's life, the busyness of David HaMelech's life, his responsibility, people knocking at his door, we need parnasa, paskening shailas, leading people out to war, running a government, all the responsibilities of being a Melech Yisrael. So was it just this very abstract, very hopeful, theoretical tefillah, Achas Sha'alti, I wish, Shifti beveis Hashem kol yemei chayai? It seems painfully unrealistic for someone who lived the broad life of David HaMelech. So he writes in the Sefer Sha'alti in the Hakdama, he says two answers. I'd like to maybe add a little bit of a third mahalach. He says maybe David HaMelech was davening that Shifti beveis Hashem, at least kol yemei chayai, that should be the chalois yemei chayai, that should be the end of my life. And we know the Gemara, the famous Gemara, David HaMelech, mamish died with a sefer in his hand. Till the last moment, trying to outsmart the Yetzer Hara, he left the world from the world of the Beis Medrash, mamish with the sefer in his hand. So maybe David HaMelech says, it's not going to be every moment of my life, but at least that should be the conclusion. That should be the final chapter of my life, the Kachava. But then he says another pshat, which I think is such a beautiful pshat for Bnei Yeshiva. And that is, David HaMelech was davening. It's true, I'm pulled in a lot of different directions. But I daven, I hope that my moments in Yeshiva, that my moments in Beis HaMedrash, my Shivti beveis Hashem, kol yemei chayai, those are the best moments of my life. Those are the greatest, most meaningful, most memorable, most defining moments of my life. Kol yemei chayai. That's my whole life. And I'm sure many of us feel that. And you speak to Talmidim who were here maybe last Zaman and are working now, obviously still finding time to learn, but it's a different metzias, it's a different reality. And they look back on these moments and say, wow, those were kol yemei chayai, some of the best moments of my life. But maybe David HaMelech was also saying, Shivti beveis Hashem, I want my relationship with Torah, with Avodas Hashem, I want that, not always in the Beis Medrash per se, but I want that to be kol yemei chayai. I want that to permeate every nook and cranny of my life. I want my whole life to be filled with the Torah that I learn, the sugyas that I'm osek in, the hanhagos that I get from my rebbeim. I want that to be with me. I want that experience of Beis HaMedrash to dwell with me, kol yemei chayai, wherever life takes me. There's a Rebbe in Borough Park, the Skolya Rebbe Shlita. His grandfather, the previous Skolya Rebbe, was a tzaddik and a kadosh elyon, a survivor of the Holocaust, an incredibly holy person, a machaber svarim. The current Skolya Rebbe, in one of his svarim, it's called Chakima B'Ramiza. In Parsha Shmos, he says that he heard from his grandfather a dream that his grandfather once had. grandfather had a dream that he saw Rav Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Chassidus, in his dream. Zecher Tzadik v'Kadosh L'Vracha. And the Baal Shem Tov said to his grandfather in this dream, he said, would you like me to teach you what it means to be an Eved Hashem? Can I teach you Avodas Hashem? Do you want to learn how to be an Eved Hashem? So of course, he said, I'd love to learn how to be an Eved Hashem. They were standing on top of this big, in this dream, they were standing on top of this big mountain, this big cliff. And the Baal Shem Tov said, let me show you what it means to be an Eved Hashem. And in his dream, he said he saw the Baal Shem Tov jump off the cliff and fall all the way down below into this valley below, and to shatter into many, many pieces, in his Lashon in the Sefer, into shivrei shvarim, splintering, crashing, bursting, like you drop a glass vase or a glass plate, shattering into millions of little pieces. And he said in his dream, he sees himself running down the mountain to see what happened to the Baal Shem Tov, to see these broken pieces of the Baal Shem Tov. When he gets to the bottom, he notices, he recognizes that every shever, every broken piece, was a tzura shlema, was a complete little miniature Baal Shem Tov. And then he woke up. That was his dream. It's a strange dream. It's a mysterious dream of tzaddikim. What does it mean? Broken pieces of the Baal Shem Tov. Each piece is a tzura shlema of the Baal Shem Tov. You know, many years ago in Camp Aguda, I never went to Camp Aguda, but many years ago in Camp Aguda, they were having financial difficulties one summer. Rebelsky describes they were experiencing financial difficulties, and it was a Shabbos. They were preparing for a Shabbos, and of course, one of the highlights for anyone who's been to sleepaway camp knows that Shabbos Suda, Shabbos daytime Suda, for dessert, they usually serve watermelon. That's a common practice in many camps. He said the financial difficulties were such that they could only afford a single watermelon for the entire camp. And Rebelsky recalls the experience of cutting up this one watermelon into 144 little slices, little slivers. And Rebelsky would reflect on this years later, Rebelsky being a world-class Talmud Chacham, a Gon Atzum in all areas of Torah, of Ma'ada, of life. Rebelsky said about his own life and the various responsibilities that he has, being pulled in different directions, Rebelsky says, many times I feel like that watermelon. 144 little slices, pulled in different directions, broken into a million different pieces. Achas Sha'alti Me'es Hashem, the tefillah that we're davening during these days, and we're going to continue to daven throughout Yom Noram, all the way till the end, is that Rabbonu Shalom, I want to live a life of oneness. I don't want to be a divided person. I don't want to feel each little broken piece of me is nothing other than a little broken piece of me, a tiny sliver of that whole watermelon. But I want somehow to be able that every shever, each broken piece of me, all the different responsibilities, that all of us, every person, every human being in this world, but certainly B'nai Torah, B'nai Yeshiva, who are juggling a lot of different responsibilities. I want to be able to be a tzura shlema. I want to be a wholesome person. I want to be able to put those pieces back together again. We, the Jewish people, we're not really called B'nai Avram. Of course, we are B'nai Avram. We're not really called B'nai Yitzchak. We're called B'nai Yaakov. We're called B'nai Yisrael. I want to go back to that moment when Yaakov Avinu got the title Yisrael and just think about it for a moment to try to understand what was happening in that scene in Parshas Vayeshlach. Vayivaser Yaakov levado, vayavik ish imo. Yaakov goes back, pachim ketanim, goes back for those little jugs. Maybe it's related to the idea that we're developing. Vayivaser Yaakov levado. Yaakov goes back. He's left alone. Vayavik ish imo, and he gets into this incredible battle. Rashi brings from the Medrash Rabbah, who's he fighting against? Saro shel Esav. He's fighting against Saro shel Esav. But there's a Gemara in Chulin on Sadi Aleph Amud Aleph, where the Gemara discusses what exactly this Ish that Yaakov Avinu was battling with, what exactly did he look like? This Saro shel Esav. So one Manda Amar says, Ka'oved kochavim nidmalo. He looked, as we would imagine, Saro shel Esav to look. Like an Oved Avodah Zarah. Like some thug who's starting up with this Edel Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim of Yaakov Avinu. And then the Gemara says, another opinion, Kitalmid Chacham Nidmalo. Now, sometimes when you have different opinions, you try to find common ground, but what's the common ground between, how could it be that there's a man da'amr that he looked like an Ovid Avodah Zarah mamish, and a man da'amr that he looked like a Talmud Chacham mamish? A Talmud Chacham doesn't talk like an Ovid Avodah Kochavim. A Talmud Chacham doesn't think. His mannerisms are not like an Ovid Avodah Zarah. The way he dresses is not like an Ovid Avodah Zarah. So what does it mean that two positions in the Gemara, Ovid Kochavim nidmalo, Talmud Chacham nidmalo? And to imagine that Yaakov Avinu vaye'ovek ish imo, Rashi describes this wrestling match. Vaye'ovek, a lashon of being intertwined, a lashon of avak, this dusty wrestling match. You picture Yaakov Avinu fighting against some other Rosh Yeshiva. It's like such a strange thing. However, what was the fight of Yaakov Avinu really about? Rav Ephraim Tursky Shlita from Chicago, in his Sefer Sari Alafim, says a Gevaldik Pshat. Vayivaser Yaakov levado vaye'ovek ish imo. What does a Yaakov ish tam, a wholesome person, Yoshev Olim, what does he want with his life? What does he want? You know what he wants? He wants Achas Sha'alti. He wants to be a wholesome person. He wants to be able, Vayivaser Yaakov, I just want to be Yaakov levado, alone. I just want to be Yaakov. I just want to be able to be Yaakov. I want to be able to answer the question when someone says, who are you? I'm Yaakov. That's who I am. That Yaakov Avinu, that Yaakov Ishtam defines my whole mahus. Even though I'm a lot of different things. I'm a lot of different things, as we all are a lot of different things. I'm Moshe Tzvi, I'm a lot of different things. I'm a father to my children, B'ayin Hara. I'm a husband to my wife. I try to be a Rebbe to my Talmidim. I'm a child to my parents. I try to be a friend. I'm a Talmud to my Rebbe, and we're all a lot of different things. But Vayivaser Yaakov levado. Yaakov says, can I just be a Yaakov levado? As a Maisa, someone once came to the Brisker Rav. They were talking. It's a famous Maisa. I'm sure some of you have heard it. They were talking, and the Brisker Rav says to the fellow, so tell me about yourself a little bit, about your personal life. Like, what do you do? Who are you? And he starts to say, well, what do I do? He says, I'm a lawyer. And conversation continues. A couple of minutes go by. Brisker Rav asks him again. So he says, so tell me, ma malachtecha, like, what do you osek in? What do you do? So he figures, maybe the Rebbe didn't hear me last time, right? I'm a lawyer. Like, where? What's the name of my firm? Like, when did I make partner? What type of the corporate law? What's the shaila exactly? So he answered again. A couple of minutes go by, the Brisker Rav again, no, so tell me, what do you osik in? Ma malachtecha? He starts to describe it again. The Brisker Rav says, no. Picks up a little Tanakh that's lying on his desk on the table, and he opens up to Sefer Yonah that we're going to read, of course, on the Yom HaKadosh and Yom HaKippurim. And he says, when Yonah's on the boat, and the whole world is shaking, his whole world is shaking, the terrible storm on top of the boat, and they find this stranger sleeping at the bottom of the boat, and they ask him, Ma malachtecha? What are you osek in? How do you define, what's your malacha? What's your profession? You know how Yonah answered the question? Ivri Anochi vas Hashem Elokei hashamayim ani yarei. The correct answer, the Brisker Rav says, you're not a lawyer. That's not who you are. Maybe that's what you do to make parnasa. That's not the essence of who you are. Ivri Anochi, you're a professional Jew. That's what you are. That's the Achas Sha'alti of your life. Yaakov Avinu says, Ribono Sholem, what he's grappling with, what he's fighting with, it's an internal battle. Obviously, there's a pshat also. But on a certain level, says Rav Ephraim Tursky, what Yaakov Avinu is fighting, Vayivaser Yaakov levado. Why is it so hard sometimes just to be a Yaakov levado? I just want to be a Yaakov Avinu. Vaye'ovek ish imo. And what he's fighting with is the notion of ish imo, the other aspect of his persona that sometimes emerges. Sometimes I'm a Talmud Chacham par excellence. But sometimes I make choices, ka'oved kochavim nidmalo. Sometimes there's a part of me that's worshiping my Yetzer Hara, is worshiping my taivos, is worshiping my bad midos, which Chazal say, kol ha'koes, anyone who gets angry is kilo oved avodah zara. That's also And Yaakov says, I don't want to be that type of person. I don't want to be a splintered person. I don't want to be a divided person. Because that's the world that I've been trying to run away from. That's the world of Esav HaRasha. Vayeshuva hamalachim el Yaakov. The messengers, the angels, they come back to Yaakov and they say, Esav, your evil brother, is coming in your direction. And what does he look like? What does an Esav look like? He's holech likrascha va'arba meos ish imo. There's 400 people with him. He's 1,000,000 different people. Ribono she'olam hatzileni na miyad achi, miyad Esav. Sometimes he's like a brother, sometimes he's my biggest enemy. Yaakov Avinu is grappling, Vayivaser Yaakov Levado. Why can't I just be left alone to be a Yaakov Avinu? And that's what we're davening during these days. That's the clarity we're trying to get from Yom Noram. That's the tshuva of El, of returning to ourselves to recognize that I don't want to have that ish imo, that other aspect of my personality, or that other aspect of my Yetzer Hara trying to dominate my inner world. I don't want to live a life trapped between the worlds. I don't know who's familiar with the music of Hanan ben Ari, popular singer in Eretz Yisrael. A lot of his songs are very deep tefillos, very, very deep tefillos. He has a line in one of his songs, and it resonates. Obviously, it's an extreme, but it resonates. In one of his songs, he says, B'Shabbos margish k'mo Baal Shem Tov. Sometimes the Shabbos, I have such a good Shabbos. I'm davening, and I'm learning, and I'm steiging, and I went to the mikveh, and I put on my Shabbos levush, and I benched slowly as opposed to rushing between classes to catch lunch. I was able to just be. B'Shabbos margish k'mo Baal Shem Tov. Sometimes on Shabbos I feel like the Baal Shem Tov. U'b'motzash and on Motzei Shabbos k'mo Shabtai Tzvi. And I feel like Shabtai Tzvi on Motzei Shabbos. My whole world is overturned. Like what happened? I was so locked in. I was there on Yom Noram, Rosh Hashanah. I was so focused. I was so attentive. My mind didn't wander for a second on Yom Kippurim. And that's the tefillah. Achas, Sha'alti, me'es Hashem, osa avakesh. Please, Hashem, shivti b'veis Hashem, kol yemei chayai. I want the Torah and mitzvos to permeate every aspect of my life. Every single aspect of my life. Chavra, mi lanu gadol mi Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu has a moment in his life where tzaddikim define even a Moshe Rabbeinu trapped between the worlds. Vayifen ko v'ko, Moshe Rabbeinu comes out of the palace. Chazal say in the Medrash Koheles that Moshe Rabbeinu is like a grandson to Paro. He's been living a life of royalty in Mitzrayim, a comfortable life. And Moshe Rabbeinu, he walks out of that palace one day and he sees a Mitzri striking a Yid. And Moshe Rabbeinu, in a moment of empathy for Klal Yisrael, he looks this way and that, he makes sure that the coast is clear, he sees there's no one around, and he strikes down the Mitzri. But tzaddikim explain that Moshe Rabbeinu was about to make the biggest choice of his life. Vayifen ko v'cho means not Moshe just looking to make sure he can get away with killing this Mitzri. Moshe looks in one direction, he looks back over his shoulder, and he sees the palace, a life that's easy, that's simple, and he could just ignore the Jews suffering in the street, walk back into the palace, and enjoy a life as the grandson of Paro. But then he looks the other direction, Vayifen ko v'cho, he looks the other direction and he sees Jews suffering and he says, wait a minute, I know those are my people. I know those are my people. And Moshe Rabbeinu realized it can't be both. Because at that moment, Moshe Rabbeinu was experiencing what Yaakov Avinu experienced in the most painful of ways, because if I'm trapped between those worlds, Vayar ki ein ish, I'm not a person at all. Forget about Arba Meos ish. When I haven't chosen a team, when I'm pulled between the worlds and I don't have a sense of self, Vayar ki ein ish. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, you know what? Higi azman. The time has come to choose Klal Yisrael. Vayachas ha-Mitzri, he strikes down the Mitzri, not just the Mitzri who's harassing this Jew, this evil oppressor. Vayachas ha-Mitzri, Moshe Rabbeinu kills that possibility of being a Mitzri. Vayitmeneyu b'chol, and he buries it in the sand, and Moshe says, I'm a Yid, Ivri Anochi. Achas Sha'alti, that's who I want to be. I don't want to live a life between two worlds. It can't be that I'm one guy in the Beis Medrash, and I'm a different person at home with my parents and my family, and in shul I'm a different person, and in my summer internship I'm a different person, and when I'm on a date I'm a different person. It can't be. It cannot be. I want to read you a line from the Rav Soloveitchik Machzer for Rosh Hashanah. It's on Levochin Levavos B'Yom Din, Legola Amukos Badin, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks deep inside of us. An individual must be the same person on the street, at home, in the office, in his bedroom, and in shul, as he is when he stands wrapped in his talis during the Ilah. Rav Soloveitchik said, you have to figure out how can I be the same person in all those different environments? And he goes on to describe the ills of hypocrisy. And then the Rav reflects on how he remembers his father and grandfather and how wholesome they were, how complete they were, how authentic they were, how true to themselves they were. Rav Soloveitchik contrasted such behavior with that of his father and grandfather, people who are arba meosish, who wear all the different masks, all the different faces, who act one way when they're interviewing because they're trying to get a position, and are totally different when they're sitting with the Rebbe in yeshiva. That's not Achas Sha'alti, Me'ez Hashem. That's not what we're davening during these days. The Rav said that his father and grandfather would not stand, listen to this, would not stand a minute longer when reciting the Shemona Esrei in public than they would in private. I don't think Rav Chaim Brisker was davening Shemona Esrei in private because he slept in that day. If he was sick or something and he was davening and no one was watching, if it was a small crowd, if there was no fanfare, he didn't daven longer when people were watching because he decided, what type of davener am I? And not only that, the Rav said in Europe special garments were commonly worn by rabbis in public, yet Rav Chaim would never dress this way. See, he insisted that what he wore at home must be the same as what he wore in public. Why should there be a chiluk between who I am in my home and who I am berabim? What this highlights is it's not just about a person who's at work versus a person who's at home. We're talking about a religious person. The Shemona Esrei that you daven on a regular day should be somewhat related to the Shemona Esrei that you daven on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Of course, we're all going to put a little more into it. We get that. That's human. That makes sense. But the goal is to try to find that Achas Sha'alti, Me'ez Hashem, throughout my life. To not be a divided person. That even within the religious sphere, the religious persona, the parts of my religious life are not in conflict with one another. The Gemara in Chagiga says on Daf Chav Zayin, describing the godless of Yidden, that even the Poshe Yisrael are Malayin mitzvos karimon. Remember Chazal at the end of Maseches Chagiga, that even the sinners of Klal Yisrael are filled with mitzvos like a pomegranate. In the first volume of Bilvavi Mishkan Evna, where he with Machaber, hardly quotes anyone, he quotes Rav David Povarsky, Rosh Yeshiva of Panovich. And he says, why is this individual called a Poshe Yisrael? He's Malayin mitzvos karimon. He's mamish filled with mitzvos, like a pomegranate. How is that called Poshe Yisrael? But he says a person's life could be like a pomegranate, where each seed, when you crack open the pomegranate, is separated from each and every other seed. They're not working together. It's not miksha achas. So you can have a lot of different mitzvos, but there's a pshia in the sense that there's nothing unifying all of it. There's no achas sha'alti. There's nothing that's putting together all of those pieces. And now we come to Rosh Hashanah. Just 2 minutes, 3 minutes till we daven Marv. On Rosh Hashanah, maybe the shofar is giving us this whole shmooze without any words. Tekiah, the shofar, a tekiah, the Gemara sometimes calls a pshuta, straight, clear, singular, shvarim, but sometimes that world which could be so wholesome and so straight and so complete, all of a sudden starts to fall apart, like the Baal Shem Tov falling off the cliff into shivrei shvarim. That's how the Scully Rebbe described it, shivrei shvarim, broken pieces. But the journey of shofar, the mitzvahs hayom, on the Yom Trua, is to somehow get back to what? To Tekiah Gedola. To put those pieces back together into one long, singular scream. The whole inyan of 2 days of Rosh Hashanah is this sugya. It's 1 day, but it's 2 days. Says the Rosh, he coins the term, other Rishonim have it as well, Yoma Arichta, one long day. Is it 2 days? Is it 1 day? The answer is, it's possible with the right perspective to turn 2 days, something that looks to be divided, into something which is one. When I read the Torah from the opening word of Bereshis with a beis, and I see the Bria, I see a world that's divided. When the Rebbeinu Shalom is talking to you by Aseres Adibros, Anochi Hashem Elokecha with an aleph, all of a sudden you're back to ultimate oneness. And that's what Rav Hutner writes in a famous letter in the Pachad Yitzchak Tzadi Dalid, that Halavai, he writes to someone, I hope that you understand what it means when Chazal say that Kol HaMarich BeEchad, when we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And it's hard to even know, how does one elongate the Echad? How do you do that without corrupting the word? But Rav Hutner says, Kol HaMarich BeEchad, when you understand the Achas Sha'alti of your life, and you're Marich BeEchad, and you're able to put all those pieces into one long Echad, Ma'arichin lo Yamav Ushnosav. So I want to read you just one more passage from the Rav, from Family Redeemed. And then I'll end with a bracha. Not a Birchas Hedyot, a Birchas Kohanim. It's the Chavetz Chaim's Yartzeit tonight. We'll end with Birchas Kohanim. Rav Soloveitchik wrote in a beautiful essay, every man has an inner world. He exists inwardly as well as externally. Man's ontological essence, that is the essence of his being, is not to be equated with his conduct or routine activities. There's a hidden man whom no one knows. He hardly knows himself. Hence, in spite of watching man's activity, we gain little knowledge. The latter is a mystery which no one can unravel. Kol ha'adam kozev, says the psalmist, not because they want to tell the untruth. We're not lying because we want to, we're not trying to not be emisdik people. But says the Rav, they're simply unable to tell the truth. I see my neighbor every morning leave his house at 6:30. I know to where he drives off. I'm familiar with his occupation. Chaver, plug it in. I know what he's majoring in. I know whose shir he's in. I know whose night seder chavrus is. I know where he's dorming on campus. I know the outward world of him. I know what he will do when he will arrive at his place of business. I willy-nilly watched his conduct. I am acquainted with his habits and responses to certain challenges. I overhear his conversations with the members of his household. I know his concerns and interests. But listen to how the Rav concludes the passage. Do I know him? No. He is a mystery to me. The uniqueness of man persona expresses itself in the mysterium magnum, which no one, except Hashem, can penetrate. Like I said, I want to end with the words of the Chavetz Chaim. A bracha from the Heilige Chavetz Chaim. Chav Dalet Elul, it's Chavetz Chaim's Yartzeit tonight. Chavetz Chaim's son-in-law was once asked, what was the most impressive thing about your father-in-law? Sum up the Chavetz Chaim, an impossible question. What was his thing? How would you define him? A person as big as the Chavetz Chaim. If you had to say it in a sentence, in a soundbite, what would you say? He said, the Chavetz Chaim, his most outstanding, the thing that I was most impressed by, the thing that I was most hispal from, was the Yishuv Adas and the Shalvas HaNefesh of the Chavetz Chaim. And it came from a deep, deep emunah in Hashem. To me, that's Marich Be'echad. Being able to realize that if I'm Omed L'fnei Hashem, as we're about to be in a couple of days from now on the Yom HaDin, so then it's possible to achieve something called Achas, Sha'alti, Me'es Hashem. The Chavetz Chaim said when we daven in the Hoshanos, Hoshana degen midalekas, Hashem, save my grain. Hoshana chita michagav, save the wheat from the locust that could destroy my entire parnasa. And in that same Hoshana, on Hoshana Rabbah, Hoshana nefesh mi behala, save my soul from behala, save my soul from being scattered. The Chavetz Chaim said, because the same way that the dalekas can destroy your dagon and the chagav can destroy your chita, nefesh bahala can destroy a person. I know we're a generation that we think we're good at multitasking. It's a farce. We're not better because we multitask. We're less attentive. We're all over the place. And the Chavetz Chaim was malam itzchus on that also. He said in the Ikvus of the Mashiach, it's like Erev Shabbos. Erev Shabbos, you're running around doing last-minute things. You're trying to put together those final pieces. But the bracha of the Chavetz Chaim on his Yartzeit, the most admirable trait of the Chavetz Chaim, was the Yishuv Adas, was the wholesomeness of the Chavetz Chaim, the oneness of the Chavetz Chaim's persona. So I give us a bracha. Achas Sha'alti, we're davening it. Think about it every day when we're davening it. Achas Sha'alti meis Hashem. I want my shivti beveis Hashem to permeate kol yemei chayai. And I want that by the end of Yom Kippur, when we finally reach the final destination, so to speak, of this whole season, and we scream out, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Hashem Elokeinu, different names of Hashem, Hashem Echad. And I scream out, Hashem Hu Elokim, Hashem Hu Elokim. I'm talking about different persona of Hashem, but it's all the same, Hashem Hu Elokim. That I'll feel a sense of Achas Sha'alti. I've achieved that goal of Achas Sha'alti Meis Hashem. We'll sound that final Tekiah Gedola, that one singular final blast at the end of Yom Kippur. And we'll be able to say it and mean it, L'shana Haba B'Yushalayim HaBenuya.